I'm Meir Weinstein with Never Again Live. I'm joined with Meir Jolovitz, Mideast expert, and we're going to be discussing tonight the new peace deal between Israel and Hamas. If you could, it's hard to even say that. Israel went through a lot of different so-called peace deals. They had the Oslo Accords, which ended up in a disaster. They trusted the PLO, they trusted Arafat, and Judea and Samaria is riddled with terrorist attacks against Israel. Israel decided in 2005 to disengage from Gaza. The result, October 7th, 2023. Another point, Israel had a deal. They gave up thousands of terrorists for an Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit. One of the terrorists was Yahya Sinwar in that deal. There's a lot to discuss right now about this particular deal that's going on. And I'm joined with Meir Jolovitz. And Meir, how are you? We're certainly thrilled that Israeli hostages are returning, the living and the dead, but what's going on?
Well, there's no question, mixed emotions. Let's dispense with the wonderful, the euphoria that we all seem to be feeling, which is the impending release of the hostages. All the hostages, we're told. Yep. Every reason to be celebratory. The flip side, or the other side of that coin, is every reason to be concerned. And we, supporters of Israel, and it's certainly true of Israel itself, has a terrible habit of lying to itself just to sort of pass the moment. It was Eric Hoffa, who I often quote, who said, "We lie the loudest when we lie to ourselves." And in this particular case, whether it's done purposefully, unintentionally, or recklessly, we have been lied to, and we continue to lie. The jargon that's used to describe what we are talking about now is completely fraudulent in and of itself. They talk about a peace plan, a peace treaty, and that's being done by all sides. Benjamin Netanyahu in the last couple of days has used the term peace, I don't know how many times, and it's fraudulent. He knows it's fraudulent. Donald Trump and his team have used that term also. They've also used the expression "an end to the war," which is a fraudulent lie. They've used, Trump used the term a durable, eternal peace, which is a lie. Donald Trump, who's quite often sloppy, talked about that this might be the greatest the greatest achievement, and it's almost laughable, in the history of civilization. And he said in 2,000 years, no, 3,000 years, this might be the greatest peace deal of all time. And it's a fraud. It's a fraud because we are pretending that there is a peace deal at hand. There are other aspects of this thing that are troubling, or should trouble anyone who supports Israel. We have been led to believe that the nations which Donald Trump has invited to mediate this conflict, as they call it, are somehow honest brokers, a term that they use. We're talking about Qatar, which sponsored and still sponsors Hamas. We're talking about Qatar, which has given $7.1 billion to perpetuate anti-Semitism on American campuses. We talk about Turkey being an honest broker. The same Turkey that on March 29th of this year, a few months ago, where Erdogan came out and spoke to his parliament, and also in an interview that he subsequently did, in which he basically said that Turkey will soon relish in the destruction of the Zionist Israel. This guy is viewed as an honest broker. This guy, Erdogan in Turkey, is playing along because they're going to get the F-35s from the United States. And one other country, Egypt, which gets $1.59 billion from the United States, is playing along. Egypt, which has refused to let anyone from Gaza come in, Egypt, which has 3 fortified walls which separate it from Gaza, Egypt, which we now find out was instrumental in helping the Gazans, the Hamas people, build the tunnels. All of a sudden, they're considered one of the honest brokers, and they're going to have this little peace gathering in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is quite troubling. One other comment, and that's when we lie to ourselves. The fact that Israel has joined something which they know not to be true, and that is this deception that the Palestinians living in Gaza are themselves somehow victims. Now, I've written about this extensively, I've lectured on it extensively, and I said at the time when Israel first did this, when Bibi Netanyahu first said, in order to try and score points with the West, well, look, the Palestinian citizens themselves, the civilians, they're also victims of Hamas. The purpose of it was to try and demonize Hamas. Instead, because of the inability to look 1 or 2 steps ahead, they didn't realize that if Hamas is ever neutralized, if Hamas is ever defeated, then, my God, why would we not want Gaza to be governed by or given to Palestinians who were innocent victims of Hamas? It's an absurdity. We've played along, to use a term that Spike Lee had in his movie Malcolm X. We've been bamboozled. We've been bamboozled, and the worst part of it is that we've gone along with that. We have allowed it to happen. We have pretended that Israel is fighting. When I say pretended, we're boasting about the fact that Israel fights a moral war, that Israel has sacrificed many of its own soldiers in order not to fight an indiscriminate war, but try to be discriminate, which means that we lose some of our soldiers. To which I would argue, and I would assume that you would join me in this argument, that any time that you sacrifice any, or risk even, any of your own soldiers because you're concerned with what BBC or CNN might say, that is not a moral war, that is an immoral war that you're fighting.
Mm-hmm.
This is the underbelly of what people refuse to talk about today because, understandably, the euphoria that sweeps the Western world, anytime that Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar are in agreement with Israel, something needs to tell you there's something wrong here. And we just don't seem to be able to understand that. And it's a price that Israel is going to pay. One last thing, and there's so many different directions we can take this.
Yes.
This is a peace deal, we're told. A peace deal. It's an exchange. All too often, people talk about a prisoner exchange as if the hostages were prisoners in the same sense that the Arab terrorists. No one talks about the terrorists who Israel has already released and will be releasing. This is the part that one doesn't want to talk about because all of a sudden you'll realize that this is not a good deal. You mentioned very briefly, and I'll just quickly jump on it. 1985, we had the Ahmed Jibril agreement. Israel gave Israel, in order to recover 3 soldiers who were captured in 1982 in Lebanon, gave up 1,150. Among those released was Sheikh Ahmad Yassin, who founded Hamas. And those who were released, the 1,150, brought us the first intifada. The next one, of course, was 1993, was the treaty with the PLO, in which we recognized them as peace partners rather than the murderers of our children. And what followed was an increase of terrorism by Yasser Arafat, who simply wasn't honest. An increase of 425% terrorism in the next 18 months. Following that, of course, we had, as you mentioned very briefly, the unilateral disengagement, August of 2005. Had the August 2005 unilateral disengagement, there wasn't even a quid pro quo. Had that not happened, October 7th wouldn't have happened. And following that, of course, as you also mentioned, the Gilad Shalit trade. One soldier, Gilad Shalit, who was captured, in exchange for 1,027 terrorists, including Sinwar, and we now have October 7th. And we're making the mistake again today. As much as it is a glorious time to celebrate the return of the hostages, the flip side of that coin is a national disaster waiting to happen to Israel.
Why is Qatar being elevated to such a status that they're seeking peace? They financed Hamas. Hamas leaders were living in Qatar in luxury as billionaires. Why is it?
Because we're stupid. And when I say we, we're talking about we in the Western world. Because Donald Trump, who, by the way, when Donald Trump served his first term as president, 45, Donald Trump is on record on more than one occasion as having accused Qatar of financing terrorism in the Middle East. All of a sudden, that seems to be forgotten. Qatar, people talk about the $400 million jet that Qatar has gifted him, which apparently by the arrangement, he can actually keep even after he's president 47. Qatar needed America. America has its Air Force base in Qatar. America was doing Qatar a favor. The way that this could have ended was that on October 8th, the president of the United States, and at the time it wasn't Donald Trump, it was Joe Biden. Well, he's not sure. It was Anthony Blinken when it came to foreign policy. He was the president of the United States. If they would have said to Qatar, we will cut ties with you tomorrow if you don't pressure the Hamas terrorists to release the thing. No
Right.
ifs, ands, or buts, no negotiations. We don't need all these protracted discussions. We want them. It would have happened. The United States could have turned at the same time to Egypt and also put a demand. It said, if you want the $1.59 billion that you get every year, which saves you as a nation, you're only solvent because of our dollars. If you don't do what we demand of you, you too will be cut off. And we will give Israel every blessing to do whatever it needs to do so this will never happen again. But instead, the fraudulent Biden administration actually pressured Israel. And it was just admitted this week by the person who was Kamala Harris's Middle East advisor, the person who she chosen to be the liaison to the Jewish community. Thank God that never happened. Ilan Goldenberg, an Israeli born, Ilan Goldenberg. And he said that the Biden team decided that they were going to make some very favorable statements about supporting Israel in the beginning. So when they then turned on Israel, which was the plan, it would appear that Israel did something wrong, and therefore the United States decided to change. The admission was that the United States was always going to blame Israel. This is the reality of what we have. These are not nations which are friendly. Turkey calls for the destruction of Israel, and 4 days later, Trump applauds them as honest mediators Trump has actually said that Qatar has been given permission on several occasions by Steve Witkoff, that incompetent clown, to speak on behalf of Israel in the United States because Qatar had Hamas's ear. We are truly being played for stooges, and the tragic thing is we've allowed that to happen. During the Biden administration, there was the threat, and it wasn't just a threat, it was the beginning of the implementation of an embargo against Israel. I can understand the pressure that they had to bear, but my God, if you're talking about thousands of Israelis murdered and killed, and in the future, soldiers dying, the celebratory thing that we will now see in a few hours actually is magnificent. What about the mothers of the 914 soldiers who died? What about the mothers walking around today in Tel Aviv and Ramat Gan and Jerusalem who don't realize that their children are going to be killed in another year or 2 or 4 or 5? What's going to happen then? All of a sudden, people are going to say, the Arabs didn't keep their words. They promised us peace, and they didn't. I just want to say one more thing about this. It's interesting that the pressure that's brought to bear against Israel, there's no question that Bibi Netanyahu was forced into a situation that he's not comfortable with. He would not have gone along with this plan, this 20-point plan, which phase 2 calls for the demilitarization of Gaza completely, that Hamas would voluntarily disarm, and that Israel would withdraw completely from Gaza. Well, Hamas wasn't supposed to be around to disarm. The
Right.
three lies that were told both in the United States and in Israel is that there were three objectives, and this is being even sold by what we would consider right of center politicians or political commentators, people who truly love Israel. And they said that there are three things which we did accomplish, three goals that Israel accomplished. And the goals that they claim was, one, the release of the hostages, which is supposed to take place tomorrow. The second is the destruction of Hamas. Well, 6 months into the war, Bibi Netanyahu kept talking about destroying Hamas, eliminating Hamas, eradicating Hamas. He used the word destruct. To destroy Hamas, he must have used it 1,000 times. That isn't said anymore. It's not even to defeat Hamas. That's not even said anymore.
Right.
What they talk about is to disarm Hamas. And Hamas says no. And the last one, the last piece, which is not going to come to fruition, is that Hamas was going to amicably agree that it won't have any role in the governance of Gaza the day after. Those are
On
supposed
that
to be
point about Hamas saying they're not going to disarm, right now, excuse me, 1 second. As the Israeli army starts withdrawing from areas in Gaza, they're being filled by Hamas
already.
with weapons, and
Right.
they say they're not. Right now, they're estimating Hamas has control now over about 70% of Gaza, and so tell me, with this agreement and with the legitimacy of all these players, including the Palestinian Authority, that are going to be at the summit, and Israel's not invited to the summit. At this summit, exactly how is Hamas going to be disarmed? Exactly how is Gaza going to be demilitarized? What are we headed for right now, hours after the euphoria of the return of the hostages?
Yeah. We lie the loudest when we lie to ourselves. There's no question about that. The fact which you mentioned is quite notable, that Hamas is in the streets now, taking over the streets. What's notable is that they're doing it in uniform. When
Right.
Israel had moved into Gaza and had taken Gaza City and then Khan Yunis and then Rafah, the Hamas people were no longer in uniform, so they could blend in as innocent civilians. That isn't the case anymore. They've put the uniform back on. And
Right.
anyone who's been watching the news from the Middle East has also seen the vicious way that they have actually grabbed other Arabs who they say were too complicit with the Israeli presence there, and they're shooting them down in the streets. They're killing them. To which I say, welcome to Palestine. This is your
Right.
two-state solution.
Exactly.
Arabs killing Arabs. Now, people, and it should be said before we sign off today, that the end goal, why is Spain, France, England, Portugal, the United States is actually boasting that Indonesia is going to be coming in. They're invited to the peace conference in Sharm el-Sheikh. Indonesia, Pakistan, Indonesia. You talk about 5,400 miles away. What do they have to do with Gaza? They're Muslim. Pakistan. Why is Qatar there, 870 miles away from it? Why are they there? Why? Because this is all about Islam. It's all about Islam. And if anyone thinks that all of a sudden things are going to change, the end goal for any country that supports this, and Israel is supporting it reluctantly, and it is the two-state solution, the two-state delusion. That's the end goal. They believe Israel will withdraw. And as you saw, the Palestinian Authority, which we were told was not going to have a hand, they were told if you can self-reform, you will be able to govern Gaza. We are being taken, what did Spike Lee say, or quoting Malcolm X, bamboozled. We've been bamboozled. We've been lied to. We live in deception. And the worst part of it is that we, lovers of Israel, not we, not you and I, but those lovers of Israel think, what a wonderful day, we just got our hostages back. As if the end game was simply to bring back the few survivors, never mind everything else that happened. It's a tragedy.
Absolutely.
It's a tragedy.
Meir, we're running out of time. We're going to take it up again later in the week. We have Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah coming tomorrow night. Will be Shmini Atzeres and then followed by Simchas Torah. I mean, 2 years since Simchas Torah when the tragedy happened.
Right.
There's going to be a lot to discuss going forward in the next few days when we resume with the podcast, and it's going to be regular podcasts and regular updates for our supporters out there. So please share this. I don't know if you're watching on YouTube. I don't know if you're watching on Facebook or if you're watching on Twitter, which is known as X now. Please share it and please subscribe to our page, to our account on any of the platforms that I mentioned, and share it with your friends and supporters so we can reach a wider audience. Thank you very much. We'll take it up again later in the week. Meir, thank you for your insight.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.